Bonjour. We're here to recap about the passe composé we've learned this year by Sophie Barrios and Kira Janelle. So to create a passe composé sentence, you need two things. You need your present tense avoir conjugated plus your past participle or the verb that you're going to use. An example of this is if you wanted to say I waited, you say j'ai attendu. And in some cases, you need your present tense être conjugated plus your past participle or verb. An example of this, if you wanted to say I left, you'd say je suis parti. So first of all, let's review the passe composé endings for regular verbs. Regular verbs contain verbs that end in ir, er, or re. If a verb ends in ir that conjugates with the voir, the passe composé form ends with a simple I. An example is the verb finir, to finish. If you wanted to say I finished, past tense, you would say j'ai fini. Another regular verb are verbs that end in er, and er verbs that conjugate with the voir in the passe composé form end with an e. An example of this is the verb parler, to speak. If you wanted to say I spoke, past tense, you would say j'ai parle. The third to the collection of regular verbs includes verbs that end in re, and these verbs that conjugate with the voir in the passe composé form ends in an u. An example of this is the verb répondre, to respond. If one wanted to say I responded, they would say j'ai répondu. However, there are irregular verbs that include in passe composé. Some of them conjugate with être and some of them conjugate with the voir. Here's a chart of the verbs that conjugate with the voir. And here's a chart of the verbs that conjugate with être. These verbs specifically conjugate with être during passe composé, and an example of this is the verb rester, or to stay. If you wanted to say I stayed, you say je suis resté. When conjugating with être, for most of the verbs that do this, you take off the ending, which will either be an ir, er, or an re. You take off that ending and add a simple e. There's an exception to this, however. Some être verbs have specific endings to go with their passe composé form. These verbs include naître, descendre, or venir. There are several more, and they're displayed with the être verb chart. Most of the verbs that conjugate with être are action verbs like aller, to go, rentre, to go home, and monter, to go up. If you wanted the action verb to be plural, you add an s at the end.